Everyone thinks the Venezuela collapse was about socialism, a bus driver who became a dictator, mismanagement. It wasn't. Venezuela wasn't a political failure. It was a corporate memo sent by the United States Treasury delivered with the force of a nuclear weapon, but without a single explosion. The memo wasn't addressed to the people of Venezuela. The memo was addressed to Beijing, to Riyadh, to New Delhi, to Brasilia. The message was simple. If you try to leave the dollar, this is what your future looks like. This isn't a story about Latin American politics. This is the story of system enforcement. In 2025, that enforcement has entered its final, most violent phase. This is the Gilded Archives, where the logic of empire is written in economic rubble, not military conquest. The records show a pattern mathematically impossible to ignore. In 2000, Saddam Hussein started selling Iraqi oil in euros. By 2003, Iraq was invaded. The justification was weapons of mass destruction. The weapons didn't exist. The currency did. The oil returned to dollars. In 2011, Muammar Gaddafi planned a gold dinar, a single African currency to bypass the dollar and euro. Hillary Clinton's leaked emails confirmed the truth. The intervention wasn't a humanitarian aid. It was to stop the currency. Gaddafi was removed. The plan died. In 2017, Venezuela stopped pricing oil in dollars. Venezuela began publishing prices in yuan. Venezuela attempted to launch an oil-backed cryptocurrency. Within 24 months, America applied maximum pressure, sanctions, asset freezes, total blockade. 3 different leaders, 3 different decades. The crime was identical. They tried to unplug from the system. The consequence was identical: destruction. The architecture of system enforcement has 3 layers. First, the sanction. Imagine your bank card stopped working at the grocery store. Now imagine it stopped working everywhere on Earth. Venezuela couldn't import medicine, couldn't import parts for oil rigs. The machinery rusted. The people starved. Not because Venezuela ran out of money, because their money was refused at every port in the world. The records show Venezuela's collapse began in 2014. The crisis accelerated in 2017 when the sanctions intensified. By 2024, approximately 7 million Venezuelans had migrated. The collapse wasn't caused by dictatorship. The collapse was caused by dollar exclusion. A competent government can't function when cut from the global financial system. Second, the asset freeze. Venezuela owned Citigo, a massive oil refinery in the United States. The US took control of it. Venezuela had approximately $2 billion in gold sitting in the Bank of England. When Venezuela asked for it back to buy food during COVID, the UK refused. The gold remained frozen. The confiscation was legal because the assets were in foreign jurisdictions. The confiscation was possible because those jurisdictions answer to American authority. By 2024, Venezuela had lost access to approximately $10 to $20 billion in frozen assets, including Citigo valuation and Bank of England gold. The figure pales in comparison to what happened to Russia. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, America froze $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. The escalation was enormous. The message was clear. If you violate the system, your wealth disappears. Third, dollar exclusion. This is the weapon that terrifies every world leader. If a nation is cut from SWIFT, the international payment system, the nation is cut from the world. You cannot buy insulin from France. You cannot buy grain from Brazil. Every trade at some point touches a correspondent bank in New York. A bank in New York can block it. Venezuela was the demonstration. The US took a nation with the largest oil reserves on Earth and turned it into a wasteland. The demonstration showed that oil is not power. The payment system is power. Control over who gets paid, who gets insured, who gets cut off, that is empire. The data reveals the mechanism with precision. The Venezuelan collapse didn't happen in 2023. The collapse began in 2014 when oil prices crashed. The price crash wasn't market-driven. Saudi Arabia flooded the market with production increases. The intention was to hurt US shale producers and Iran. Venezuela was collateral damage, but the crash served another purpose. It showed the world that even nations sitting on the world's largest oil reserves can be destroyed. When sanctions escalated in 2017 and 2019, the mechanism became complete. Venezuela couldn't export oil. Venezuela couldn't import necessities. By 2024, Venezuela's economy had contracted 80%. The population had halved through migration. The healthcare system had collapsed. The electricity system had failed. The government couldn't function. The system had worked perfectly. The enforcement was invisible. The consequence was absolute. The comparison to historical enforcement reveals the mechanism. In the 1800s, empires enforced dominance through military power. Britain had the strongest navy. Britain could prevent nations from trading outside the pound sterling system. When a nation attempted non-pound trade, Britain would blockade them or invade them. The enforcement was visible. The power was obvious. By 2024, American enforcement is identical but invisible. America enforces the dollar system through OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. America can prevent nations from accessing dollars just as Britain could prevent them from accessing ports. The mechanism is the same. The visibility is different. The modern empire doesn't need to invade Venezuela. The empire cuts Venezuela from the dollar system and the economy collapses. No military required. The architect of this enforcement mechanism is the Treasury Department and OFAC. OFAC has authority to sanction nations and entities without congressional approval. OFAC has authority to freeze assets. OFAC has authority to disconnect entities from dollar transactions. OFAC operates by executive order. The rule is simple and unwritten. Trade outside the American system and lose access to the American system. The rule is demonstrated through consequence. Iraq demonstrated it. Libya demonstrated it. Russia demonstrated it. Venezuela demonstrated it. Every nation learned the rule without it being stated explicitly. By 2024, the world had learned. The demonstration was so clear that alternatives became necessary. Every time you make an international transaction, you engage with this mechanism. You want to buy goods from overseas. The transaction requires dollars. The transaction clears through American banks. American authorities can see the transaction. American authorities can block it if it violates sanctions. You experience the convenience of global commerce. You don't experience the control. The infrastructure is so smooth that the power is invisible. A nation attempting to trade outside the system experiences the control immediately. The nation can't buy anything internationally. The nation can't sell anything internationally. The control becomes visible only when you attempt to escape it. But there's a second layer the records reveal. The world saw what happened to Venezuela. The world got scared. China, Russia, India, Brazil looked at Caracas and said, "We need an exit strategy. That is why BRICS exists. That is why they're hoarding gold. They're building a lifeboat because they saw the US sink the ship." By 2022, when America froze $300 billion in Russian assets, the message became impossible to ignore. The enforcement mechanism had escalated. By 2024, the response was visible. Saudi Arabia was accepting yuan. India was settling trades in rupees. Brazil was joining BRICS currency initiatives. The enforcement mechanism was breaking because it was used too many times. It's like antibiotics. If you use them too much, the bacteria becomes resistant. The world is becoming resistant to sanctions. The current moment reveals the acceleration. In 2024 and 2025, the threats are no longer secret. Donald Trump warned openly that any nation leaving the dollar would face 100% tariffs. He warned that if you help China secure energy outside the system, you're next. This is no longer the Cold War. This is the liquidity war. The empire is announcing the rules publicly because the enforcement is weakening. When you have to announce the threat out loud, the threat is losing its power. The empire wouldn't need to threaten if the system was secure. The threats are desperate. The world can hear it. We are at stage 5 of the dollar enforcement consolidation pattern. Stage 1 was the establishment of dollar dominance in 1944 at Bretton Woods. Stage 2 was the expansion of OFAC authority in the 1960s to 1980s. Stage 3 was the use of sanctions as a tool in the 1990s to 2000s. Stage 4 was the escalation through visible demonstrations like Iraq, Libya, and Venezuela. Stage 5, where we are now, is the breakdown of enforcement through repeated use and the acceleration of alternatives. By 2027, BRICS currencies will account for approximately 15 to 20% of international transactions. By 2030, alternatives will be sufficient that dollar exclusion won't be catastrophic. By 2035, the enforcement mechanism will have significantly eroded. The dollar will remain dominant, but will share power. The monopoly will have broken. The 3 paths forward require acknowledging the enforcement system's reality. First, accept the system and comply. Trade through American infrastructure. Settle in dollars. Accept American authority over your transactions. The benefit is access. Nations that comply have full access to global commerce. Nations that comply don't face sanctions. The cost is structural dependency. Your economy depends on America's permission. Your government depends on dollar access. Most nations would choose access over independence if offered explicitly. Most don't realize they've made that choice because the rule is invisible. Venezuela thought it could break the rule. Venezuela learned it couldn't. Second, resist through alternative systems. Build yuan denomination capacity. Accumulate gold reserves. Create payment infrastructure independent of dollars. This is expensive and difficult. China can do it. Russia attempted it after 2022. Most nations can't. The resistance is available to large economies with resources. It's not available to small nations. Venezuela attempted resistance without sufficient preparation. Venezuela was destroyed because the alternatives weren't ready. Third, positioned by understanding what survives when enforcement fails. When paper promises, dollars, euros, bonds are weaponized, trust evaporates. When trust evaporates, value flows to the only things that cannot be frozen by a politician in Washington: gold, land, energy, production. Venezuela learned the hard way. You cannot eat oil if you cannot sell it. The West is about to learn a harder lesson. You cannot print money if no one wants to take it. The deeper protection lies in what the archives show always survives currency and payment system control, productive assets independent of any single system. A nation with food production, energy production, and manufacturing can survive isolation. A nation dependent on imports and unable to produce dies when excluded from the system. The distinction between dependent and independent is production capacity. Venezuela collapsed because Venezuela is dependent on imports. Venezuela has oil but can't export it without dollars. A nation with food, energy, manufacturing, and internal markets can survive. The protection is production, not financial maneuvering. The pattern says what comes next. The Venezuela operation was supposed to be a display of American strength. History is remembering it as the moment the world decided to leave. The enforcement mechanism broke itself through overuse. By 2027, when the next nation attempts non-dollar trade, the demonstration will be less effective because alternatives exist. By 2030, a nation will attempt non-dollar trade and survive because alternatives exist. By 2035, multiple nations will trade in non-dollar systems simultaneously. The enforcement mechanism will have broken completely. The system will have fragmented. We are watching the end of the petrodollar era and the beginning of the petro-reality era. In this new era, you don't want to hold the debt of a desperate empire. You want to hold the assets the empire is trying to control. Venezuela was the message. The world is listening. The world is building alternatives. The collapse of bond market confidence will be the reply. The empire announced its rules through force. The world is learning the rules and preparing to break them. The system that was supposed to last centuries is approaching its obsolescence because it was weaponized so completely that it destroyed itself. If this pattern revealed something you'd never seen before, subscribe to the Gilded Archives. History's records reveal how empires enforce control and how that control eventually breaks. The dollar system isn't unique. It's one iteration of a pattern that repeats across centuries. Understanding it allows you to see the pattern in the next enforcement demonstration, the next nation that challenges the system, the next consequence that looks political but is actually structural. The records are specific. The mechanism repeats. The outcomes are predictable. We're just watching it unfold, and